Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 148th episode of the Truth Island podcast. A question that has arisen fairly recently is the idea of whether or not a person should trust their instincts regarding the major decisions that they make in life. On one hand, each of us has probably experienced moments in our lives where things simply seemed off, where we didn't fit in, weren't working the right job, or were asked to do something that just didn't feel right. Our instincts are not simply superstitious inclinations that we have, but rather innate biological proclivities that compel us away from danger and towards the completion of a certain task. For example, it is said that birds, by virtue of their instinct, are inclined to build nests in order to support their young. There is no coursework or manual that teaches a bird how to do such. In fact, there is not even another bird around often to help in this endeavor, and yet the bird instinctively knows that it is a task it must perform in order to prepare for the next generation. Humans, on the other hand, are also guided by instinct. We feel compelled to help those who are in need, to protect the innocent and weak, to build shelters for ourselves, the need to eat, and even the need to fornicate. However, unlike animals, us humans are also endowed with logic and reason. We are told that these faculties are positive, as they tend to make us negate our most basic instincts and aim for something that is of a higher good. For example, a child's instinct to eat nothing but candy bars is negated by his logic and reason, which teach him that eating nothing but sugary sweets will eventually corrode his teeth and can lead to a number of other health problems. But perhaps in the 21st century, the pendulum has swung too far. We now increasingly find ourselves living in a world where every decision that is being made for us is not being made off of instinct, but rather off of data and statistics. We are told time and time again not to trust our inner voice, but rather put our faith in the hands of science and empiricism. While science has certainly given us a lot, and it can often be helpful to know what might be best for large quantities of people, there is still something that feels a tad off when we completely disavow our instincts. Joining me to help regain my instincts on this issue, I am once again joined by Kenny. Kenny, if you had to go on pure instinct, what feels right to you, instinct or science?
Well, if I had to go on pure instincts, Instincts. So the instincts or science, I would say that both have their place. And so this idea that instincts supersede science, and when we're talking when we're talking science, what are we talking? We hopefully we're talking about true science, actual science, which is simply observations and then making hypotheses of those observations to test whether, and then making observations, theory, hypothesis, and then how you say results, right? So finding out exactly what is. So I think science is very is very philosophical in the sense of it's still trying to find out what the actual what is true about this life, and I love that. Um, but science cannot, at least for now, answer every question, and so there are still things that we're still trying to figure out. Instincts instincts can be incredibly helpful because we have, like you had mentioned earlier in the introduction, we have instincts that make us give us this strong impulse to either build a community, build a home, have kids, populate, and so forth. But we also have instincts that kind of go against certain good things. Like he had mentioned about the kid who wants to eat candy all day, and it's hence the sweet. So we, human beings, we often instinctively we desire things that are pleasurable, sweet, and so forth. And that's not always a good thing because you have cavities, and then you have diabetes, and you have malnutrition altogether, and then then you're just food for the earth. So I would say that it's a bit of both, because for those places that science has answered honestly questions about reality, I would say absolutely science. Then for sure, science in you know in, hopefully in the true sense of the word, should be the should be our director. While when we don't really where we don't really know, where we don't really understand certain things, then instincts can be very helpful. I once my wife and I went to a to a hotel. We were driving. I think we were driving to Colorado, and we had stopped at a hotel where once I saw the hotel, and this way, never book a cheap hotel. Just spend the extra dollars and get a
Yes.
like
And
hotel.
always look at the reviews, okay?
Always,
Always look at, it doesn't matter what no matter what my instinct tells me, I always go on the websites and read like at
look
least a
at the,
hundred comments of like, here was my
yeah,
experience.
science,
Yes,
technology, baby.
yes. When it comes to hotels, I am a pure scientist. Absolutely.
So, we went to this hotel, and my instincts said, get the hell out of here. Self-preservation. It's like, don't stay here. It's not safe. And I was like, yeah, go to my, I'm a 6'2" black man. There's no way in hell I'm going to be in any danger, like. But I came out to get to get our baggage from the car, and there I saw very peculiar sights. I saw people ducking and crawling about, and almost looked like someone was going to get shot. Someone had been, no one had been shot, but it looked like someone was about to get shot. And I told my wife, listen, get in the car. We are getting the hell out of here. So, though there was no specific danger, there was no specific, how you said, besides the awkward crawling about or, hiding behind bushes or whatever it was that was going on, there was no indication of imminent danger. But my instinct said, don't stay here. And I gladly obeyed. And, here I am today talking to you. So to reiterate it, I would say there's a place and a time for both.
Okay, there's so many things that we need to unravel here, and this is going to be a good discussion. So I think that one, science needs to acknowledge that our instincts are there for a reason. They're actually a survival mechanism, because sometimes science makes it seem as if our instincts are just superstition or faith or belief. I'm like, actually, if you really look at science, our instincts are there to protect us. And I loved your example of the hotel room, because that's exactly what your instincts are there for, Kenny, because that hotel room represents a lion, and you're tapping into your tribal instincts of like, there's a lion here, there is danger, right? And lion today translates with a dangerous man with a firearm that's nearby, right? And science doesn't like if you were traveling with if it was you, your wife, and you were traveling with a scientist, the scientist would be like, it doesn't matter that people are ducking, we need to go to the room and take a look. But it's like, no, Mr. Scientist, like my animal instincts are kicking in. There's something wrong with this place. Even though I haven't observed a man with a gun, I feel that there's a man with a gun in this hotel room, and we need to get out of here. And it's like, from a logical standpoint, right? The rationalist scientist would say, no, man, if you don't see it, it's not there, or right? If you can't prove, right? If it can't prove it's there, it's not there. But there's something, there is something that's magical within us that tells us that there is danger on the horizon. So I think that scientists just need to acknowledge, like, we don't understand how instinct works, but it does have, like, it is something that protects all of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's so now, how do we? The question is, how do we define instincts?
Yeah.
And next question is, okay, are all our instincts right? Are all our instincts correct, and so forth? And I one might even say that science itself is born from instincts, in
Yeah.
the sense that man has an instinct, an instinctual desire to understand his universe, to understand the world. And so, there is within us this primal place from which we derive this incessant desire to study and to create the subject of science in the sense of observation, and then science from there becomes more methodical, abandons the instincts, becomes more methodical, and but I would say one gave birth to the other.
Okay. So I think there's two types of science. I think there's science that coincides with our instinct. And that science is absolutely beautiful. So, like, I have an instinct that eating candy bars is not going to be healthy for me. I have both the instinct and the science to back that up. It feels wrong and it is wrong, right? Like, so the science is there. And I think for a great deal of science, it actually supports our instinct. Like, people will learn something, and like, I remember being in psychology class, right? And they had these fancy terms for everything. And I remember just sitting there being like, yeah, I kind of know that. I kind of know that. I don't have fancy jargon to explain that phenomenon, but something inside of me has known that that is always true, right? And that's beautiful. Like, when the science that is being created kind of corresponds with our instinct, that's actually a very beautiful thing. Now, here's the difficult part. What happens when the science does not correspond with our instinct? And I'm going to give you a perfect example of this. And we've actually talked about this example before. In the case of child rearing, there's a lot of science that's saying, let your kid run wild, let them do whatever they want, and then they will naturally, organically grow into a human being, And I'm like, something about that goes against my instincts. Like, I feel that kids need boundaries and they need rules, but you have an example of where science is telling you to raise your kid in one fashion, whereas my instincts are telling me to raise children in another fashion. And I think that we are getting at some crossroads here where maybe throughout the 20th century, the science and the common sense and the instinct were all going hand in hand in tandem with one another. But now we're getting to a level where some of our instincts are telling us that something's wrong.
I think that's that's actually pretty um, pretty interesting, because I think you're right. There are places where, and child rearing is one of those places that is, in fact, an interesting meeting of the opposites. Because often your instincts when it comes to your kids is very different from what the everyday psychologist would tell you. And at least, but here's the thing: is that even among psychologists, there are many different schools of thoughts on how to raise children. You have this idea of, what was it, the something along the lines of, I forget what it called, but it was a cycle. It was this. There's a show called Caillou, and it's built on the psychology of a certain on a certain psychological idea, really pushed for by some French psychologist whose name I forget right now. But the idea was simply to, I don't butcher this, the idea was simply to raise the kid in a way that is, they get to do what they want, and you just be there as some sort of a loving support and so forth. And it sounds like a really good idea on paper. It sounds great. But the problem with that is, kids can be horrible.
Yeah.
So you have this. I mean, that's why Caillou was actually pushed back. I mean, when the show came out and people started seeing just how horrible this kid was, and this was a PBS show, by the way. It was created by two Canadian ladies who were really big fans of that psychologist. And when it came out in the United States, at first it was accepted for a little bit, and then when parents started seeing just how badly this kid behaved, there was a really big pushback. And now it's actually been canceled and moved from PBS. So sometimes, and people often consider psychology as soft science, because you're not dealing with hard concrete facts. You're not dealing with quantifiable, measurable elements, like this is a gallon of water being poured into, being mixed with this a certain measurements of whatever other chemical or whatever it is. So you're dealing with, you're not dealing with an exact science. You're dealing with a very loose science, and that's where the problem arises. And because children, like people, even as hard to consider them fully people, but people are very, well, complex. There are a lot of factors that go into who your child is and how they're going to interact with the world. So when it comes to soft sciences, when it comes to science like psychology, personally, I kind of take it with a grain of salt because there's no, it's hard to make absolute statements. It's at least as far as I know, it's hard to make absolute statements. At least if not all the time, lots quite that's often the case, and I still think that they could get it wrong, and they often do, as far as I know, get it wrong. But when you're dealing with mathematics, when you're dealing with numbers, when you're dealing with elements that could be observed, elements that could be that their behavior is either consistent or varies by a very small variable. It's easier to make concrete judgments, concrete statements about these things. So when I would say that now we have to now say, okay, there are two types of sciences. There's the hard science, concrete mathematics, numbers, unchanging things. The tree is the tree is a tree. This tree always bears mango fruits. It always does. That's just we've observed. That's why we call it a mango tree. Now, if it sometimes it bore this fruit or that fruit and so forth, and it becomes this chaotic expression of nature, then it would be very difficult. And I think when you're dealing with, people, hence the science of psychology, you're dealing with very chaotic environments, and so it's hard to pin things down. So often, I would say that when it comes to those kinds of things, it's very important that if you, I mean, reading the scientific journals and finding out what the today's psychologists are saying, it's all fine and dandy, but I would say that your instincts as a parent, because we are natural beings. I believe that we do have a capacity to have this inborn knowledge of how to raise our kids. Just like a bird knows instinctively how to fly at a certain age, at a certain time. So when you become a parent, there's certain instincts that crop up in you, and I would say it's pretty good to pay attention to those as well.
Okay, I think that's an excellent distinction. And I do agree with you that the soft sciences is a lot weaker than the hard sciences in many regards, because the soft sciences has a much more difficult job. It's trying to predict human behavior, and we are very irrational, chaotic beings. So it's
Yeah.
really difficult to do that. And I agree with you. If you're a parent, you know your kids better than any psychology magazine or article or whatever. You just do. And I think that as a parent, you need to trust your instincts of like, no, my kid needs to be disciplined. It doesn't matter what the psychology magazine is telling me. I know in my heart, and I know my instinct is telling me that my kid is falling off the deep end here. I'm taking away their iPhone or whatever. And and I think the same is true for politics. I think the same is true for sociology and all other soft sciences. It's like we interact with this world and we just know what is right and we know what is wrong. Like we know it at a instinctual level. And this actually complements what Socrates and Plato said. They said that all knowledge of good and evil derives from within us, right? And I think that the Bible also speaks of that as well, that we instinctively know what is good and what is bad, at least in matters of like human affairs, right? In terms of like human morality, in terms of like how to raise our kids, when someone is getting out of line, when this politician is lying to us. Our instincts typically serve us pretty darn well, especially like when we're watching the news and we see a politician. It doesn't matter what the mainstream press or whatever is saying. You can just look at a person talking on the television and know that guy's lying to me or that lady is lying to me, right? But there's something about that. There's something about that inner voice within us that can look at someone's face and say they're not being truthful right now. They're being deceitful. And I think our instincts, it may not be 100%, but I'm willing to wager that our instincts are right at least 80% or more of the time when it comes to who in this world to trust and who in this world not to trust. Okay,
Yeah.
I want to tackle a little bit of the hard sciences because I'm starting now. I agree with you that the hard sciences are a lot more robust than the soft sciences, but I'm also starting to see a few cracks in the hard sciences as well. And I think one example would be the Industrial Revolution and climate change. If you were living in the 19th century or early 20th century, come on, man, there's nothing wrong with driving this car. It's perfectly fine. It's totally cool to get in this car. It's not going to harm the environment. And then boom, like 100 years later, we're finding out that these cars are now emitting like carbon emissions and destroying the environment in ways that we never predicted. Physics, I used to have a lot of respect for physics. I thought that physics was like ironclad, but now I see that there's all of these different theories, right? Like there's all of these different theories emerging in physics. Like this is just a giant simulation. No, 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 it's just our consciousness. The universe is actually doing this. The universe is actually doing that. And I'm like, well, geez, I thought that physics was hard science, and I think it is hard science when it comes to explaining the laws of gravity and the speed of sound and the speed of light. Like I think physics is very robust, but when you actually look into theoretical physics, you realize it's just a bunch of guys, spouting off their opinions, right? Because there is, right, and
Yeah.
and we're in the field, we're having all of these people coming out with their quote unquote grand theories of the universe, and I'm like, come on, dude, you're just a dude. You're just a dude saying what you believe is reality or what you believe the world is working for. So I'm starting to see the holes in the hard sciences. I grant you that the hard sciences is way more robust than the soft sciences. And I think the hard sciences shine very nicely. Like if you want to build a bridge, I think engineering 100%, it's totally robust. But I'm starting to see that there's some holes and weaknesses when it comes to the more theoretical side of the hard sciences, especially in areas such as physics.
Well, that's when you're dealing with human beings, that's one of the things you're going to get. We like some of us like our steaks well done, medium rare and so forth. The point is simply that when we're dealing with people, wherever there's a loophole, whenever there is no an exact where there are no exact numbers, exact laws, you find that a bunch of theories, opinions, and so forth are going to come out, and it's all then it's any man's game. It's quite natural. It's and this is why it's important for every man to think for himself. This is why it's important for um, I generally have this idea that I don't care who said it. The question is not who said it, because I'm not a scientist, and I know that people have high regard for scientists. Nobody thinks more highly of scientists than scientists. So look in the mirror like, oh my goodness.
That's a great quote. No one thinks more highly of scientists than scientists. And there are some, I have to say, there are some very arrogant scientists out there who say, oh, religion, just a bunch of fairy tales and nonsense. I'm like, well, hold on there, Mr. Scientist. Hold on there 1 second. Like, just because you're not interested in something doesn't make it less valid. Maybe religion is not going to help you build a bridge, fair enough, but it's like, it does have utility to it. Just because you don't find any utility in it doesn't mean it doesn't have any utility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of the problems with when I find that a scientist is an atheist. The question is not, for me, it now becomes a question of, okay, so what's your proof? You need, like, what's the proof for not believing in either a god or even in religion? The point is, if you're really a scientist, it's not a matter of you have to be honest with yourself, because you have to come about these things honestly. And the question now becomes, okay, what's your proof for their being, or your proof for their not being? And so I would say that an honest scientist actually has only one place to be, and that's usually the agnostic, in the sense of it may be, it may not be, and that's because if you're gonna be a scientist, I believe that it's important to be consistent, so that you're trustworthy. It's because this is not a it's not a game of emotions, and it's certainly not a game. It's not a game of preference. A scientist is one of those, at least the ideal scientist, and that profession is held in such high esteem that there's very little room for one's own dilly-dallying about. It really has to come down to what is versus what isn't, and proof for what is and proof for what isn't, and so forth.
Okay, I had a feeling we were going to go here, and I'm glad that it was just a matter of time before we made it to the Holy Grail here. And and here's essentially the problem with science, and I think you stumbled upon it very nicely. When science stays within its respective domains, like here's how you build an engine, here's how you cultivate stem cells, here's how you build a bridge, here's how you build a tall building. When science stays within what it does best within its, because science, what does science do best? It does the best of building stuff and giving us technology, and it does a lot of wonders and making us healthy and creating cures and vaccines and all this wonderful stuff. That's what science does extremely well. And when science does what it does extremely well, we love it. Where science is starting to go awry, in my opinion, is when it wants to be religion. That's the cardinal sin that science is making right now, is that you have physicists or you have like physicists that are coming and they're like, oh, we can explain infinity, we can explain the universe. And I'm like, okay, you've made some inroads with the Big Bang, you've made inroads with explaining that, but like you're not going to take the place of a religion. The other domain that they kind of step on is like, what does it mean to be a good human being, or what is the meaning of life? Like when it comes to the larger questions, you're not going to take the place of religion and philosophy. You're just not, it's not what science is meant to do. Science is not meant to do this. And this is what, like, this is one of the things that I get into arguments with. Like, I'll be randomly on Facebook and someone will post, why do we need philosophy anymore? We have science. And I'm like, it's like asking, why do we need hammers? We have screwdrivers. It's like, well, you need both, right? I'm not saying, right, you need both to do different purposes. I think the purpose of philosophy and religion is to give our life meaning, make us into good people, and explain some of those like higher questions that don't really have an answer for. That's simply not the domain of science. And I think science is making a fool of itself by trying to dabble in areas where it was never meant to dabble in.
Yeah, but that's because people have given it free reign to do so. And science is actually, I mean, scientists have actually often they've taken up the mantle of we know everything. And so it's one of those things where once you're looked as the person with all the answers, even when you don't have the answers, you are hard pressed to give an answer because you don't want to be seen as less. If I've noticed in life that it's one of the hardest things for people to say is I don't know. And when you're dealing with hyper intellectuals, and when you're dealing with people who have been applauded all their lives for giving the right answer, it's really hard for people to acknowledge they don't know a certain thing, or to let somebody else answer it. So you can't. So when we're dealing, scientists in all their glory, God bless them, are still humans. And in what I've noticed about if we know anything about humans, is that we lie, we cheat, we steal, we're unkind. We're humans. So science, the ideal science is beautiful. Science ideally is beautiful, but when you have humans who are involved, and you can't have science without humans, you find that it becomes a very different game. So you had mentioned earlier about it becoming a religion, and stepping into domains that really don't suit it at all. It's 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 what we do. It's what we do. We always want to spread out. We always want to take over things, and and yeah, it's just a natural progression of the human psyche.
Okay, because I think that like it's not just like a lot of people might write this off as like silliness or foolhardiness, and like, oh well, they're just trying to provide, like they've been lauded for giving the right answers all of their life, and they're just trying to continue to do that. But I actually see something a little bit more fiendish about this, because I think it is an attempt for them to kind of broaden their power base. And like, again, maybe this is just the politician in my mind thinking right now, because it's not just a question of like, oh, you've accidentally stumbled upon or you're misguided in this theory. It's like, it's this idea of they want to be the sole provider of answers. Now, why is it that the scientist wants to be the sole provider of answers? Is because they want sole power, right? Because you don't want to just be knowledgeable because you want to be a knowledgeable person. You want to be the sole source of information because you want to control people and you want to have power and influence. So I actually see something like when I see all of these theories, like, is this a simulation? Is this conscious? I see like this attempt, this very meek attempt to try and control us. Like, see, we can explain the universe. We have, and I'm like, no, this is just simply the conjecture of men and women sitting behind tables and coming up with theories. And again, these theories might be right, they might be wrong, but they're just theories. And I have a problem where my problem arises when some of these theories are treated as fact when they are not fact. They are just simply the theories of men. And again, and I say to myself, well, why are these men coming up with these theories? Is it just intellectual curiosity, or is it to exert power over someone else?
Well, I want to believe that intellectual curiosity and just having good old fashioned fun having and good old fashioned professionalism is taking place. But by now, my view of man and life is, I would say, way past that. And I think that people are often, as you said earlier about power, we're much more motivated by it's money. So it's power, it's pleasure, and materialism. And so at the end of the day, this is really what, unless the person is a very very unique individual, you're really dealing with these things. This is all there is. People think that simply because a person is brilliant, they think, oh, he's brilliant, he must not care about the baser things in life. No, he does. Power, the accumulation of power is, I mean, is super important to a lot of people. I mean, the average human being doesn't even know how interested they are in power, like how interested they are in power, like to
I like that. Yes.
like the simple act of turning on my television from my couch with a remote is awesome. It's for now is the closest I've come to anything telekinetic.
And on the second day, he said, "Let there be television."
Let there be HBO, baby. So so yeah, scientists are human beings, and as much as they don't like to be reminded of it, they are humans, and they are prone to not only mistakes, but mistakes are understandable. But what's not understandable is a conscious, deliberate twisting of things, twisting of ideas, or twisting of knowledge for one's own personal gain, for one's
Yes.
either material gain, gain of accumulation of power, and and the like. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to like clarify something I said earlier, because it might be I was just thinking about it a little bit, because
Let me hear it.
I don't want to hamper anyone's intellectual curiosity. So if there's a scientist out there who believes or has a theory that this is all just a simulation, I don't want to be like, no, man, you can't touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? Like, my friend, go ahead and explore. Go ahead and write mathematical proofs. Do whatever you think that you need to do. It's just that my concern comes when the scientist goes from, hey, I came up with this crazy conjecture, and then starts saying, oh, I stumbled across the secrets of the universe. That's where I get a little worried, where it's like, you've taken your intellectual curiosity and now you've presented it as something that it is not. It's fine that you call it conjecture. It's fine that you call it theory. Totally cool. But when you start presenting it as fact, that has to be power driven. That's not just that's not just that you're not just a kid playing with like building blocks and having a good time. It's you presenting something that's just a theory as being fact. And why exactly are you doing it? It's what you just said a few minutes ago. It's because you're concerned, you're trying to elevate your own power. You want your name to be in the textbook of like, I discovered the nature of reality and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you just haven't, you're not there, man, and that's not for you to do. And I think that humility is really going to be the answer to all of this, because I think the best engineer knows how to build a bridge, knows how to, knows the physics of everything that they're doing. But when you ask the engineer, hey, engineer, what's the meaning of life? He goes, I don't know. Why don't you go ask a priest? Or why don't you go ask a rabbi? Or why don't you ask a philosopher? That's where I think science actually looks magnificent, because it's confident and it's robust in what it does know. And it's powerful in what it does know how to do best. Like you would never, you're not going to ask a philosopher how to build a bridge, because that's not where their power lies. So I think true power is when you know what you're powerful in and the things that you're not powerful in.
Oh, yeah, that's. I think that's well said. It's it's humility. It's an understanding of one's place in life. It's understanding of what one knows and what does not know. It's honesty. It's. I think it's pleasant. It can be pleasant to the soul, and but yeah, when you're dealing with humans, you have to take it all. This is and humans are known for the accumulation of power and goods and the desire to was the word was yes for fornicates. That's that's so whatever gets us those things. It doesn't matter if it's often. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's just a matter of how quickly can I get what I want.
Okay. So the last thing I want to say here before we close out is I think it's important to go over some domains and perhaps some areas in which we should yield to science, and then some areas where we should yield to philosophy and religion. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
going to name a number of issues in life, and then we're going to either throw it into the domain of science, or we're going to throw it into the domain of religion and philosophy. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds good.
Okay. Medicine and health.
Science.
100%. Okay. So if it's a question of like, my inner voice is telling me not to take this medication, your inner voice is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Like your inner voice is wrong in that. Okay. When it comes to interpersonal relationships, or raising children or the people around you, science or religion and philosophy?
I would say religion and philosophy.
I agree with you. Okay. You know the people around you, you know what they're made out of, and you don't need, there's no psychology or science that's going to tell you how you handle the affairs with others.
Yeah.
And again, this is super obvious stuff, but I think it's worthwhile. Nature of the universe. Like, how were we created? How does time function?
I would say it's a bit of both, because if we're talking about the nature of the universe in the sense of okay, how does the universe function?
Hmm.
So how do the planets rotate, and what's the material for each planet? Is there life on each planet? That's science, because you're dealing with the universe. You're dealing with nature as it is, and you're trying to find out okay, when I do, what does soil do? What does these certain plants? What are they like? Are they poisonous? Are they not? And so this has to do with experimentation, observation, and so forth. And this is very science. But if you're dealing with okay, when you say how does the universe function in a way of what's if you're dealing with the universe as a as a
So maybe let me see if I can help you out here. So there's two universes that we can talk about. There's the observable universe, which is what you see in a telescope and what you view with satellites. And I agree
absolutely
with you. The observable universe
is
belongs within the realm of science, 100%. If they say that there's dark matter in that corner, that's 100% science. So I think when it comes to the theoretical universe, that's probably religious and
The
philosophical
philosophy, yes.
investigation. Okay.
Yes.
Now I'm going to put an important caveat though, because I can imagine a scientist say, "Hey man, don't tell me how to, you like I have mathematical proofs here that prove," and I'm like, okay, you can do whatever it is that you want, but when you're engaging in mathematical proofs of a theory of the universe, you're not engaged in science, you're actually engaged in philosophy, even though you're using math. So, because the scientists say, hey, I'm using math to prove the nature of the universe. And I'm like, okie dokie. But what you're still doing is you're still doing a branch of philosophy. So I would
Yeah.
say I would actually take that math and put it into the category of philosophy, because it's still in the realm of conjecture and it's still in the realm of theory. It's not observable. It's not an observable thing. So it's still
Yeah.
philosophy. So I think that's a good rule. I think that's an awesome rule, that the observable universe is the domain of science. However, the theoretical universe is the domain of religion and philosophy. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. What constitutes a good life? What's the meaning of life?
I think is now we're also touching a bit of both. What constitutes a good life? In what sense are we talking? So, what constitutes a good life in the sense of having your chemical balance straightened out. Talking about
Oh, I didn't
um,
even think about that. That's good. Yeah.
you're talking about what should you eat in order to at least function well throughout the day, because I would assume that's part of having a good life is you're not just tired all the time, and you're not just in, malnourished all the time and so forth. So I would say that when it comes to the physical good life, the exercise and so forth, and science takes place because these are things that are observable. But when it
Sure.
comes to the what the meaning of life is, or what constitutes a good life metaphysically, when you're dealing with, or socially interacting with people and so forth, I would say that it's the realm of religion and philosophy.
Excellent. And I'm glad that you made that distinction. I would say that in terms of what you eat, I think that I would categorize that as medicine. So I would say that,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah.
medicine.
So when people say, well, in order to live a good life, you need to eat lots of broccoli or carbohydrates or whatever it is that they're saying, which one of the things that bothers me is that sometimes the science on this changes every 10 years. In the 2000s, they were saying the Atkins diet, like just to eat meat all the time, so there is a lot of vacillation and a lot of fluctuations when it comes to this.
Yes,
But I would say, generally speaking, what you should be putting in your mouth and the amount of water you should be drinking, as far as that constitutes a good life, definitely the realm of science. However, in terms of should I pursue wealth? Should I pursue being good onto my neighbors? Should I pursue a life of altruism? That is within the domain of religion and
philosophy.
philosophy,
Yeah.
100%. Am I missing anything? That's all I can think about right now. But am I missing any other thing? Any other
Nothing that I can
lines?
think of.
Huh?
Nothing that I can think of. I think, yeah,
And I think this is important, because I think it's funny. Our very last episode was boundaries, and I think that this is a boundary that just needs to get ironed out. I think there are areas where philosophy, like and I think even Socrates said this. He said it would be ridiculous for a philosopher to argue with an engineer. It would be absolutely absurd. It's like, philosopher, shut the hell up and take a seat. The engineer knows how to build this bridge. Just shut up.
yeah,
But I think it's just, but what happens is that there isn't this equal amount of outrage when the engineer says, oh, hey, this is the meaning of life. Like, there should be an equal level of outrage when the engineer steps out of his corner and starts lecturing the philosopher, because the philosopher should never, 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 ever argue with the engineer about how that bridge should look like. And that same courtesy needs to be returned. The scientist needs to basically extend that same level of courtesy to the religious person and the philosopher in terms of
yeah.
how someone lives a good life.
In an ideal world, I think that absolutely that would be the case, and that would be a good thing to do. Yeah,
Absolutely. And last thing I'm going to say before we close out is that, when I say religion and philosophy, I'm putting that in the domain of instinct, right? Because a lot of, like, it's instinct. Like, when you are reading the Bible, when you're reading Plato or Aristotle, a lot of it, like, when you're reading Aristotle, you don't turn to the index and there's a bunch of scientific studies cited. It's just like Aristotle says something and you instinctually say that's true or it's not true. So I would say
yeah,
that philosophy is really much grounded in in instinct. That's what it's grounded in. So when we say philosophy and religion, we're talking about instinct, because a lot of those truths are instinctually true, not necessarily like scientifically empirically true. Kenny, thank you so much for being on here. I think your instincts served you well on this episode.
Well, my instincts said to come, so I'm glad that you had me on. Thank you.
This concludes the 148th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Ezra.